like to start by asking you about you growing up in Houston.
Houston was a smaller city when I was growing up here. It wasn't this huge, sprawling metropolis that it is now. It was big enough to be sophisticated, but small enough to feel, well, I wouldn't say cozy for a child, but containable. I grew up in a wonderful family. My father was a magical being, the kind often called a real character. I've written about him and how my parents took us traveling around the world when we were very young. How my parents took us to Vietnam in 1965 to see what war was, to Saigon. I grew up in an extended family, some of which is still here in Houston. My mother was very active in volunteer work, very much so. My father was a well-known immigration lawyer. I went to public school here, Mark Twain, Pershing to Bel Air. And while none of us have families of origin without without some wounding related to family of origin, the older I've gotten, the more I've come to appreciate the powerful good and undeniably deep love given to me by my parents.
And if you were describing Houston to someone who'd never been here before, what would you say about
Oh,
the
at this
city?
point, I say that Houston is a totally cool, world-class city. It is. It's the fourth largest city in the United States. It's a progressive city. It doesn't at all fit some of the stereotypes people have about Texas. Some of those stereotypes are well earned, but not by Houston. The myth is that Texas is this deep red block with this one light called Austin, one progressive light called Austin, and that's not true, I don't think. There's a lot of progressive light in Houston and even a lot of light that's not progressive. But then good people are everywhere, throughout Texas and throughout the United States and throughout the world. I'm more and more convinced of that and moved by that the older I get.
Talk a little bit about the bookstore you had in the Heights. What was it called?
The Heights Bookstore.
It was called Heights Bookstore?
And it was there that I started giving little classes on A Course in Miracles. So when I moved to Los Angeles and the woman at the Philosophical Research Society asked me if I'd ever taught the course before, I think it could be said I slightly padded my resume in that moment. I said, oh yes, I have, when those classes at that point amounted to a few people sitting around a table reading the Course in Miracles together. But that's okay. It wasn't actually a lie. It was just a small class.
So what other kind of things did your bookstore offer?
It was a small general stock bookstore.
Okay. And how did you find A Course in Miracles? How did you come to?
I was living in New York City in, I believe it was 1976 or 77, something along that line. And I went to a party, and at the person who was holding the party, I saw the book on his coffee table. And I picked it up and I just started reading. You know, you just pick up a book and you start thumbing through it. And I found the ideas compelling. Just you open a book, but particularly I opened to the introduction and it said this is required reading. And I looked at the front of the book and what book announces itself as required reading? And then I saw that there was no author on the front of the book. So I was just intrigued. But also I saw traditional Christian language. I'm Jewish, and I had studied in college quite a bit of Christian theology, but that was within an academic context. So I felt a little like, oh, I don't think this book is for me. But the man who was holding the party told me that the books were published out of an apartment at the Beresford Apartments on Central Park West, and I think 79th in New York City, is it? And I didn't forget that. And a year later, I was in such pain in my life that I thought again about that book, and the language didn't even occur to me. And I thought to myself one day as I drove on a bus on Central Park West, as I passed that apartment, I said to myself, I'm going to get those books. This was about a year later. I went home that day, and the Course in Miracles was sitting on my dining room table. I lived with my boyfriend, and he had been with me at that party. We had not talked about this book the entire year. I looked up at him kind of shocked because I had had that thought, and his words to me were, I thought it was time. And he, in fact, had seen the book at a bookstore that day and had brought it home. So I think a lot of people have stories. Most people do. How they found the Course. And remember, the Course in Miracles does not claim to be for everyone. That that line about required reading does not mean this particular book, this particular form of spiritual truth is required. What is required for all of us, by nature itself, is that we will emerge into a more noble truth. And life will stop working if we resist that journey. And ultimately it will stop working for the species if we resist it as well. And we're seeing many signs that the species is behaving in maladaptive ways that are maladaptive for our own survival. And like any other species, we will mutate, we will change, or we will die.
So how do you feel you gained expertise in A Course in Miracles?
I've learned that it's not all about me. I've learned that there is no connection to God outside my connection to other people. I've learned how to forgive, and I've learned why you have to. I've learned to atone for my mistakes. I've learned that not to take life as a joke, because it's not one. I've learned that how you treat other people is how they're going to treat you. I've learned that love is all that really matters.
So you left Houston, moved to California, and I'll put in the facts about Angel Food and the 25th anniversary and all of that. What would you like young people to know about the AIDS crisis?
I think it's important that stories be kept alive. I think it is important for young people to know about that crisis, because the people who were affected by it were young then. They were young just like these young people are. And the bravery, the love, and the power activated. For instance, the Human Rights Campaign. There was no gay America was not a politicized force before the AIDS crisis. Gay marriage would not be happening. We would not have gay marriage today were it not for the AIDS crisis, because the AIDS crisis is what led to the politicalization, Human Rights Campaign, and so forth. AIDS also profoundly impacted the mainstream medical model in the United States, because when AIDS began here, Western allopathic medicine had nothing to offer. And we celebrate and are deeply grateful for the fact that today it does, but it took them time. Well, when all these people were told, we have nothing to offer, this just means you're going to die, they didn't just go home to die. That's when people started seriously investigating all kinds of alternative healing methods. So the word then was alternative, then it moved to complementary, and now it has landed where it belongs at integrative. But the whole integrative medical model emerged the way it has in the United States and has become such a staple of our mainstream understanding because of a particular crisis where allopathic medicine had no more cards to play. So it had great, I mean, in those two areas alone, but also in terms of young gay people. I believe strongly in honoring our incarnation. I think you incarnate where you incarnate for a reason. Man, woman, gay, straight, transgender, black, white, Asian, North American, South American. And I think that there is something about a deep, not only self-acceptance, but responsibility. I think part of conscious living and mature living is the development of a sense of responsibility to your ancestors, to those who came before you as well as to those who will come after you. To know the history of your tribe. It's important that African American people know the history of race in America. It's important that Jews understand the history of the Holocaust and persecution of the Jews. It's important that gay people, I think, understand the history of persecution of gay people and Stonewall and the AIDS crisis, both in order to recognize dangers that lurk and also in order to claim appropriate pride in the bravery of your people. And also to keep your eye on those who will come after you and what every generation has to do to rise to the occasion. I think sometimes we say, oh, we're really glad they did that. Thank you very much, but now we're living our lives now. But when it comes to, well, AIDS did not arise out of persecution. I do not believe that. But I think that not specifically related to AIDS now. Let's take this away from AIDS. Racism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, and so forth. It's like a virus in humanity's system. It goes to sleep. But every generation must remain vigilant, because these are darknesses of the spirit that until we're an enlightened species, vigilance must never end.
So those kind of things are reawakened by people who
They
speak
morph
to
and
that.
they morph. And there's been much progress made, and it's a beautiful thing. But, these sometimes, and you see this unfortunately in America, and you certainly see this on the planet, sometimes certain forms of darkness, barbarism, that have been gone for hundreds of years, may show themselves again, show their face again. And also, the fact that gay people have made such progress in the United States is a beautiful thing, but you still have people imprisoned, tortured, and killed for being gay in other countries of the world. So you never know generally. And one of the reasons it's important to share with young people is because that's part of the way young people mature and grow up. Is it's time now for you to get out of your sweet little bubble of childhood, and this is what really goes down on this planet, and you do need to know.
That's true. So in lifetimes like ours, we've seen homosexuality go from being classified as a mental illness to now Ellen's wedding on the cover of People magazine. What can we learn about the progress of gay rights from the progress of gay rights?
What we can learn is that America is a great country. What we can learn is that things do change. I remember, and that's a very important thing, that you keep both in mind. Both the things that need to be addressed and the things that have progressed. This is very important. That's what keeps you from being cynical or angry, is to know of course you need to keep working, but these wonderful things have happened. I remember when it was a big deal if there was a gay character on television. I've lived so long. I remember when there was a sign at the medical towers where I used to go with my mother when I was a little girl, and there would be a sign on the upper floors between the elevators, colored bathrooms downstairs. I remember it because I remember asking my mother why. So in my lifetime, I have seen such changes, both with race and with racial improvement as well as with gay rights. So these things go in jig-jag. I think what's important to realize is that progress doesn't always happen in a straight line. Sometimes there are two steps forward and then one step back. Look at the pushback happening right now with transgender in North Carolina. So that anytime there's social movement forward, then there's blowback, there's pushback. So that's part of a mature understanding. But yeah, absolutely, it's unbelievable how the progress that's been made, and it's also true that we're not all the way there. And no generation, I think I'm at a point in my life now where it really dawns on you, no one generation is going to, maybe some generation, but it will not be my generation, it will not be your generation, it will not be the generation of people who are young today who get to put the capstone on the pyramid and everything's been handled. People who built the great cathedrals of Europe, they took hundreds of years to build. And all of the artisans and the stoneworkers and the painters and the bricklayers knew that this would not be completed in their lifetime. But these cathedrals were built in honor of the Virgin Mary. And their love for her carried them and lifted them above self-centered concern about whether or not they would ever see the job complete. There's a line from a Jewish philosopher, I forget exactly how it goes. You are not expected to complete the task, but neither are you allowed to desist from it. I'll find the exact quote. It's great. It's like, nobody's expecting you to get it all done, but we are expecting you to work on it. Yeah.
What role does anger play in social change, or how is it?
Nothing very helpful. Anger is like white sugar. Gives you a rush, but then you crash. It's there is a kind of outrage, however, that is not born of anger, that's born of love. And that is very appropriate. For instance, during the AIDS crisis, there was an organization called ACT UP. And a lot of the message seemed to be that we should be angry. Well, the truth of the matter was, in terms of Reagan's ignoring the crisis for far too long, there I understand outrage. But there were a lot of ways. I remember saying to people during the AIDS crisis, before this happens, you weren't known for voting for the underdog, were you? Because it hadn't come home to you. You vote with at an immature level, we vote for at an immature level of political and social development, we vote for our pocketbook. At a higher, more evolved level, we vote for social justice, issues of social justice, because, as they say in Judaism, they might not be coming for us this generation, but could happen at any time. So, I was so moved by the new mayor of London the other day, who is a Muslim, and he called out Jeremy Corbyn, who's head of the Labour Party, for not standing up, speaking strongly enough against the anti-Semitic comments that had been made within his party. And Sadiq Khan, the new mayor, said, I'm Muslim. They've done that to me. If they do it to anyone. So if it's a black person, a Jewish person, a gay person, a Muslim person, anybody, the force that would do it to anyone would do it to everyone. Or the force that would do it to anyone would do it to anyone else. And that I think is important. That it's not just about gay people. It's not just about black people. It's not just about Jewish people. Not just about... It's about people. But particularly people whose lives are affected and harmed and potentially destroyed by forces of prejudice and hate. That's why I felt so strongly about gay marriage. I don't think that gay people deserve to be able to be married because they're gay. I felt they should deserve to be able to be married because they're American. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you're American. To me, I don't see what else is there to discuss there. I think lifting it to that higher place was where it spoke to me. You're gay, you're not, it's none of my business. That's the beauty, that's the American dream. The American dream is that any of us can be here, living whatever life we want to live, as long as we don't hurt anyone else. Go for it, have fun.
What do you say to those who are apathetic about politics?
Are you speaking specifically among like young gay people and so
Or
forth?
just any. There's a lot of people that sit out elections, they're disillusioned or they...
Not voting is a vote. For instance, Donald Trump's hope is for a low voter turnout. Whenever there's a low voter turnout, Republicans win. When there's a high voter turnout, Democrats win. That's the general. So if you think that by not voting, you're rebelling against the system, you're fooling yourself. Not voting, you're voting Republican. And in this election, if you're not voting, you're voting for Trump.
What did you learn about politics from your run for Congress that maybe you didn't know before?
I learned that the horse race itself is hard. Running was an exhilarating, albeit brutal experience. It didn't leave me cynical about politics. It left me grateful for having had the opportunity to participate that way. As passionate about the issues as I was before. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter. I am a romantic about America. You know, take gay people. Despite our problems, how can you compare being gay here to being gay in Uganda? We need to remember that.
So be proud of America.
You know, it's said in Judaism that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And every generation of Americans has to rediscover our passion for democratic possibility. It is not a guarantee. Exceptionalism cannot be bequeathed from one generation to another. The idea is exceptional. And that, I think, is where the issue of political apathy comes in. Many of the people who would say they're politically apathetic seem to have no clue how blessed and privileged they are by the blessings of American democracy, the blessings of American liberty, and the extraordinary sacrifices made by people throughout our history to ensure those liberties.
They take it for granted?
Take it for granted. And it shouldn't be taken for granted.
People outside of Houston are surprised that Houston elected a lesbian mayor.
Isn't that cool? But that's what I meant. Houston's a world-class city. Houston, you know, when people say to me sometimes in my work, oh, you don't seem like a Texan, I have said, no, this is a Texan. This is a Texan. I mean, this is, you know, Barbara Jordan came from Texas. Jim Hightower comes from Texas. Ramsey Clark comes from Texas. Ann Richards came from Texas. I mean, this is Texan. You know, the fact that we're girls out there saying what we think, you know, this is Texas. So I was not surprised. Because you know, once again, I come from Houston. I know Houston well enough that no, I was not surprised. That's what I meant by this myth about Texas. It doesn't apply to Houston.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I want to tell you something else. When I grew up, the stereotypical Texas lady, if there was one, was Laura Bush. Barbara and George represent what I thought of as the conquering hordes that came down, the Yankees who came down to Texas, and they wore cowboy hats, but that's not the Texas I grew up in. George Bush was not the Texas I grew up in. Laura Bush was most of my elementary school teachers. Very nurturing, very kind, very nourishing. Kept her mouth shut, way too much for my taste, but I always felt like she was thinking hipper thoughts than she let on.
Yeah. We do have a history of strong women.
Absolutely.
And independence.
Absolutely.
If a young person came to you and wanted to make a difference right now, what are some action items that you could recommend?
Close your eyes. Place yourself in service to God of your understanding. Say, make, and pray to become the person that God would have you be, to do what God would have you do. That means the issues are going to come up in your own life where you need to forgive, where you need to atone, where you need to take responsibility for your life, where you need to clean up some mess in your life, where you need to make some apologies, make some amends, deal with some character defects. And the more you do, the more you purify your own heart, the more Spirit will be able to move through you. And you will know where you can and should make a difference because it will be in your heart. One will have to do with what I said before. If you're a gay person, what's happening? If you're a black person, what's happening? If you're a Jew, what's happening? I feel very strongly about that. Because there's a line there. What's the ancestry? What's the descendants? To really take responsibility for the generations that come after us. And that includes being an American. But also, I think, we have passions. One person feels passionate about animal rights. Well, that's your assignment. Another person feels passionate about sex trafficking. That's your dharma. That's your assignment. Another person feels passionate about filmmaking. That's your assignment. That's your dharma. So the more you meditate and pray, the more you feel moved and able to follow your own internal guidance. Jordan Bach, do you know who Jordan Bach is? Look him up. I hesitate to say it in the thing until you check it out. He's a guy in New York, but I think he's a transformational speaker. I think specifically talking to the gay community. You check it out. Gordon Bach, B-A-C-H, and also Ryan Weiss, W-E-I-S-S, Ryan, R-Y-A-N. I think they're speaking kind of specifically, but I could be wrong.
How do you describe God?
I don't think you can describe God. That's why in the Bible, the Old Testament, you have to make no graven images, and Jews are told to write God, G hyphen, D. You're not even supposed to give letters to it. Description, only the mind can describe. The spirits sees through all description and form. The closest we can get to naming God is love. That's what Moses was told to hide his face.
A lot of your message involves God, and a lot of people feel separated from religion today.
Yeah.
How can we bridge that gap?
Everybody has their own path, their own higher power. Some people are only comfortable with the discussion of these matters in secular terms, then that's fine. They'll find them in secular terms. They'll read Carl Jung, they'll read Joseph Campbell. I mean, there's no right or wrong. It's a kaleidoscope. There are different facets of the diamond. But I think that some people over the last few years, last few decades really, who eschewed religious dogma and doctrine, and for very legitimate reasons, then found that they had thrown away the baby with the bathwater and want to come back to the genuine religious experience, esoterically, not exoterically, not in terms of dogma and doctrine and rules, but in terms of an internal set of principles. Because I grew up in a religion where there was no dogma or doctrine. There was nothing for me to rebel against there. So I never had quite that problem. God was never presented to me in my childhood with any connection to guilt or punishment.
So your experience was more of a loving God, loving presence.
But there are so many books, there are so many teachings, there are so many paths, and as I said, some of them don't use the word God. So I might not be the book that you read, and that's fine. But for me, the word is fine. So it's fine. So I use it. There's a lot of so-called spirituality these days that leaves out God. I don't know how that's supposed to work, but
what What are some highlights of your life so far? Just some things that stand out.
1 through 10 is being my daughter's mother.
I know you've traveled a lot and met a lot of people.
Yep.
Anything in particular stand out?
You know, I was talking, actually I mentioned during my talk the other day, what impresses me when I travel around the country and the world is how good people are and how intelligent people are. And if you base your sense of what this world is like on what you get in the media, you don't see our failure as a species at this point is to develop political and educational, social and economic systems that exalt the better angels of our nature and foster and promote the better angels of our nature. And that is because we have acquiesced to the emergence of geopolitical and economic systems that posit us as economic beings before all else, needing to compete with each other to get ahead, separate from each other. We've developed a world, a construct in which we feel spiritually homeless, in which we are trained to see ourselves as separate and at the effect of rather than one and in communion with, whether it's other people, a spiritual source, or the planet itself. And that's the tragedy of our time, is that breach, that gap between who we are and this world that what we've made of things. But I am confronted with that exquisite and potentially tragic irony all the time. How can you and I have connected? You were so kind to me. We're here in the car. You're doing something with your life. We're all doing something that promotes good. I'm going off to do more. You're going off to do more. This is the way people want to live. This is the way people want to live. And you and I were from all kinds of places. Parents, education, spiritual, led to a place in our lives where this is natural and easy enough for us. But not enough people were and are, including not enough children. Right? So I think the point is, whatever led us to be able to be here, living decent lives, happy lives, good lives, that we increase our sense of responsibility to the creation of that same possibility for more people, particularly more young people.
Something you've been saying in your talks is stop answering the cell phone and start answering the call
to
of the ages.
We are so bombarded today with distracting impulses. You have to commit. You have to commit these days. I will listen to good music. I will watch good television. I will watch good films. I will read good books. You know, one of the things I've found in the last few years is how enriching great literature is. To read a great novel, it does something to you. To listen to great music does something to you. To cultivate enrichment.
There's a lot of information available today.
And there's a lot of great information available. And that's why there's really no excuse for not getting involved in great and noble things. Because if whatever great and noble thing you're interested in, Google it. Because it's on there.
What is your greatest hope for the world?
Greatest hope is what everybody's greatest hope is: peace.
Are you basically optimistic?
Long term. I'm optimistic long term because, as it says in the Course in Miracles, God's will has never not been done. Love will prevail. But free will means it's completely up to us how long it takes. Sometimes people say, don't worry about the state of the planet. The worst that could happen is it has to throw us off for 250,000 years. I can't laugh at that because if you think about it, that scenario would accompany immeasurable amounts of human suffering. I don't know if you've ever read the book The Road. It's a devastating book about the aftermath of a nuclear holocaust, nuclear war. It's global nuclear annihilation of some kind. It doesn't specify. So short term and medium term, I am optimistic only in the sense that I think optimism is a moral imperative. Concerned. But long term, I know it's going to be glorious. I just know it.